Hello everybody and welcome to another album review. Today we're going to be taking a look at the new album from the black metal band Behemoth titled I Loved You at Your Darkest. So for those of you who don't know, Behemoth is a blackened death metal band, I guess, from Poland, and this is their 11th album that they have released. It's coming after their last album, which was called The Satanist, which was one of the most highly praised extreme metal albums in recent memory. It is a very good album and one that I feel like a lot of fans were wondering if they were going to be able to top it. And they just released this new album recently, and I listened to it a few times, and I have some thoughts on it, I guess, and I figured I was probably going to review it anyway. So as usual, I'm going to start off with the good things and then the bad things and my favorite songs and all of that kind of stuff. So let's get right into the review. So first things first, as I typically like to point out, the production and everything on this album is good. It's enjoyable to listen to. Some people who are like the black metal purists, I guess, may not like that, but it works for me. I think it sounds fine. And for me, being able to listen to it enjoyably is definitely a plus. Another thing with this album that stands out to me with a lot of Behemoth's music actually, is their lyrics. And I don't particularly agree with some of the lyrical themes and ideas presented through them and stuff like that, but they are very interestingly written and very well written. And if you actually go and look up some of these lyrics and research into them a little bit. For example, on Genius.com, which has song lyrics, you can go and find this album, and there will be people who have gone on there and annotated the lyrics with little bits of information and stuff, so you can actually read a little bit deeper into the songs, which is what I did prior to doing this review. It's really interesting to read about because there's some very interesting things that are written about, and clearly Nurgle, who is the vocalist and I believe the one who writes the lyrics, or whoever it is in the band that writes the lyrics, knows their stuff basically, and they're able to write it in a very interesting way and reference things and, you know, all of this different stuff that makes the lyrics not only cool to hear and kind of try to understand the meaning that way, but also to look a little bit deeper into. I also enjoy the vocals on this album. Nurgle is a very good vocalist. He's one of the best extreme metal vocalists around these days, I think. And this album does something that you don't really hear a whole lot with this band, and that is it uses mostly the death growl kind of vocals that you would typically hear from this band. But then it also uses some clean singing in some songs, like Bardsabel and I believe Sabbath Matter as well. And overall, that kind of adds a little bit of an extra dynamic to this album that hasn't really been there. I mean, they've used clean singing vocals occasionally in their other albums, but it wasn't really used as much, I don't think. And while it's not used a whole lot here, it's only used in a few songs. It's enough to give the album a little bit of variety when it comes to the vocals and keep things a little fresh and interesting. This album also makes use of like choir in a couple of songs and even a children's choir in the song God Equals Dog, which I thought was kind of interesting. It seems a little weird for them to do that, but then if you look at like the music video with the imagery presented there, and then even I think some people have pointed out some things with the lyrics or whatever kind of meaning the song or the video itself has kind of makes sense with that. But it's a very strange thing to hear on an album like this, but I think it kind of works. Another standout for me, which is probably the biggest thing that makes this album unique from Behemoth's other albums, is the instruments. This is probably Behemoth's most unique album thus far. It does a lot of things very differently from their previous material. which I'll get back to in a little bit. For example, the guitars in this album, you do have some of the typical, like what you would expect to hear from Behemoth kind of stuff, but then you also have a lot more of like the clean guitar and acoustic guitar kind of little interludes and stuff like that that are used in several of the songs. And again, it adds more dynamics to the album, makes the album more interesting to listen to, and makes it more unique. And also just the style of the guitars, how they sound, how they're played, sounds a little bit different from anything they've really done before, I think at least. And I think that is also a really interesting thing about this album. And the drums as well, the same thing could be said for them. The playing style and everything is a little different in some songs from what you would typically hear from Behemoth, but it all sounds really good, and the instruments overall along with the vocals all just kind of come together really nicely. And as I mentioned about this album sounding different, that is another one of the big positives for this album, I think. With the success of their last album, The Satanist, it kind of, particularly with the first one or two singles that they released, I felt like they were going to be trying to not really replicate, but do something like that again. And then the third single came out, which was Bartzabel, which was vastly different from anything that Behemoth has done before. It made me think, like, maybe they're going to do something different with this album and try to not do the Satanist part 2 and instead do something a little bit different and expand upon their style and that kind of thing. And that is exactly what this album did. It does have a few songs on it that are very much for the fans who really enjoy Behemoth's kind of signature sound that they've had for pretty much their entire career. There's going to be a few songs on here that are going to appeal to those kinds of fans, like God Equals Dog, Angelus the 13th, and Wolves of Siberia. And those songs feel very much like Behemoth songs. And then you have other songs on this album like Bartzabel and Havohedge Pantocrator. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that at all correctly, but songs like that are very unique and very different from anything they've done before. Not that anything else on the album isn't like that as well, but those are probably some of the more standout examples. One of the first things that I thought when I heard the song Bartzabel was that it was probably the closest thing that Behemoth has ever gotten to doing like a metal ballad, basically. It's much more mellow and just has a really different feeling from a lot of their other music, and I really liked that. However, the difference in the sound of this album in comparison to their past material may actually be one of the biggest negatives for not necessarily myself, but for some people. I can definitely see this being kind of disappointing for people who wanted just something very similar to everything they've done before. While you do have a couple songs like that on this album, like I said, it does do a lot of different things from their past material and kind of expands their boundaries a little bit. And for the kinds of people who have been fans for a very long time and want something very similar, or something like that, just people who want more of the kind of classic Behemoth sound that people know and love, those kinds of people might be disappointed with this album because it does things so differently. And there are also one or two songs on this album that I didn't really like as much, like Sabbath Matter. Really, that's pretty much the only one. Of course, a couple of songs on here may not be incredibly great, but they're still enjoyable, and I don't really skip them when I listen to the album. And really, that's about all of the negatives I have for this album. It is a very good album. I've listened to it maybe 3 or 4 times now, and I've enjoyed it each time. I would say if you have been like a long-time fan of Behemoth, or you're like myself and you're relatively new to them, because I only started listening to them maybe like this spring, definitely check this album out. And if you are curious about this band and would like to listen to some of their best material, I would say that this album definitely has that. Although I wouldn't say it's necessarily a good album to start with, I do think that it is still a fantastic album to listen to if you just want some good music. So overall, it is a very high recommendation for me. It'll most likely be in my top 5 albums of the year, which has gotten a little bit more difficult to figure out as of late because several good albums have come out recently, including this one, that are kind of messing up what my kind of preconceived idea of my top 5 was going to be. But anyways, as far as my 3 favorite songs from this album, they would probably be the 2 singles, God Equals Dog and Bartzabel, along with Romans 5:8, which I believe is actually the verse that kind of inspired the album title, because, you know, another way to say the verse in the Bible is kind of the phrase that's used, "Son, I loved you at your darkest," which is where they got the album title, which I thought was kind of neat. Yeah, those are probably my 3 favorite songs. Of course, there's a couple others like Angelus 13th and We Are the Next 1,000 Years that I also really enjoyed, but those are probably my 3 favorites. And that's pretty much it for the review. Let me know what you guys think of the album. Did you enjoy it or did you not enjoy it? How do you feel about the change in style? Let me know all of that in the comments, and that is pretty much it for this video, so I will see you guys next time.